Ethan Grant's fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced ease, his eyes darting between multiple screens as he wrapped up the final details of his latest project proposal. The office hummed with activity around him, but his focus was unwavering, a trademark of his role as project manager. He took pride in his sharp attention to detail and his ability to juggle complex tasks without missing a beat. But when he glanced at his watch, his concentration wavered. It was already past 7 p.m. Time had slipped away from him once again. With a soft sigh, Ethan saved his work and began shutting down his computer. The day had been a blur of meetings and tight deadlines, leaving him craving nothing more than the comfort of home and a peaceful evening with Sophia. The drive home was always a much-needed break from the chaos of the office, and tonight, it felt especially welcome. As he pulled into the driveway of the modest suburban home he shared with his wife of 8 years, the tension in his shoulders started to melt away. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as thoughts of Sophia filled his mind. She was his calm, the perfect balance to his fast-paced world. Her yoga classes kept her busy, but he treasured their quiet nights together. The sense of peace she brought to his life was irreplaceable. When he stepped inside, he called out, "Sophia, I'm home." But the silence that greeted him was unsettling. His brow furrowed. He remembered her mentioning something about a late yoga session, so it wasn't entirely surprising. He shrugged off his jacket and headed to the kitchen for a quick snack before a long-overdue shower. As he passed the bathroom, something caught his eye. The trash can was overflowing, and a white stick was peeking out from beneath a pile of crumpled tissues. Ethan's steps faltered, an inexplicable chill creeping up his spine. With tentative fingers, he reached for the object, pulling it free. His breath caught in his throat when he saw it. A pregnancy test. Positive. He stared at the 2 unmistakable pink lines, the world around him suddenly spinning. The reality of it hit him like a punch to the gut. This couldn't be happening, at least it shouldn't have been. Just 3 months ago, he'd undergone a vasectomy, certain that he and Sophia had made the decision to stay childless. He hadn't even mentioned the procedure to her, figuring they were on the same page. But now, holding this undeniable proof in his hands, everything he thought he knew about their life together started to unravel. He sank to the bathroom floor, his back pressed against the cold tile, his mind racing in a dozen directions at once. Could it be a mistake? A faulty test? Was there another explanation? He quickly pushed aside the darker thoughts. No, Sophia wouldn't do that. She couldn't. But the seed of doubt had been planted. As Ethan sat there, trembling, the pieces of a troubling puzzle slowly started to fit together. The extended yoga workshops, the way her phone always seemed to be face down, the emotional distance that had grown between them. "No," he muttered, his voice hollow in the silence of the room. He forced himself to stand, his legs unsteady, and walked toward their bedroom, his mind desperately searching for clarity. But as he looked around, the familiar sights of their shared life only deepened his sense of dread. The honeymoon photos on the dresser, the DIY projects they'd tackled together, even the faint scent of Sophia lingering on her pillow, all of it seemed to suffocate him. The walls felt like they were closing in. Grabbing his car keys, Ethan fled the house, escaping into the night. He drove aimlessly, his mind swirling with suspicion and heartbreak. Each possible explanation was worse than the last. By the time he returned hours later, a cold resolve had settled deep in his chest. He couldn't confront her just yet, not without proof. The next morning, Ethan woke early, his sleep restless, plagued by unsettling dreams. He went through his morning routine on autopilot, showering and dressing for work while Sophia stirred beside him. When she finally woke, he kissed her cheek and mumbled something about an early meeting before slipping out. But instead of heading to the office, he parked a block away from their house and waited. His heart raced as he watched her leave for a yoga class. Once she was gone, Ethan slipped back into the house, which felt eerily quiet, almost too normal. He began searching through their things, though he wasn't sure what he was looking for. A note? A message? Anything that could confirm or dispel his fears. He moved through the rooms, torn between hope and dread, his fingers trembling as he opened drawers and rifled through papers. Part of him desperately wanted to find nothing, to discover this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But another, colder part of him was already plotting his next move. Then, while straightening a stack of mail in the kitchen, he froze at the sound of the front door opening. She wasn't supposed to be back for hours. Had she forgotten something? He quickly ducked out of sight, straining to listen. From the entryway, he heard Sophia's voice, low and shaky. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she said, her words trembling. "I can't keep this up much longer." Ethan's blood turned to ice. He edged closer, careful to stay hidden. As he heard her continue, her voice cracking. "I will. I'll tell him it's his. He's not ready for a baby, but Ethan's always wanted kids. He'll be easy to convince. He's so naive." The words hit him like a slap, each one worse than the last. And then she said it. Ryan. The name sliced through him like a blade, his stomach twisting in knots. The word traitor echoed in Ethan's mind, cutting through the haze of disbelief. Ryan, the man Sophia had assured him was just a friend. It all came crashing together with devastating clarity. Rooted to the spot, Ethan felt his grip tighten on the doorframe, his insides churning with a storm of emotions. Betrayal, fury, and a cold, unshakable resolve. Without a sound, he slipped out of the house, starting his car and driving to work. To anyone else, it would have seemed like just another ordinary day. But inside his mind, the wheels were turning, planning his next move. The Ethan Grant who left that morning was no longer the same man. He was someone new, someone determined to uncover the truth and take back control of his life. The next morning, the sun rose bright and unbothered, mocking the chaos that consumed him. Lying in bed beside Sophia, he stared at the ceiling, every breath she took stirring up a mix of revulsion and sorrow inside him. When she left for yoga, Ethan moved with a cold, calculated efficiency. One by one, he packed his things, everything except the few items too painful to carry. Photographs, mementos of a life that now felt like a lie. In the bathroom, his gaze landed on the pregnancy test still sitting in the trash, its silent accusation hanging in the air like a verdict. With grim determination, he turned away. Ethan carefully picked up the test, slipping it into a small evidence bag he'd prepared earlier. He didn't have any immediate plans for it, but he knew it might be useful later. Next, it was time for the financial reckoning. Sitting at his desk, he logged into their shared accounts, methodically transferring every cent into a private account he'd opened years ago, just in case. A few keystrokes later, he changed the passwords to all his personal accounts, cutting off Sophia's access entirely. As he worked, the sting of betrayal began to fade, replaced by something colder: satisfaction. She would come home to an empty house, and maybe, just maybe, feel a fraction of the devastation she had inflicted on him. Once his belongings were packed and stowed in the car, Ethan took one last walk through the house, his home for nearly a decade. Each room was a minefield of memories. Lazy mornings sipping coffee, festive holiday celebrations, quiet evenings spent curled up together on the couch. He forced himself to shove those thoughts aside, hardening his heart against the pang of emotion that threatened to resurface. There was one final piece of business to attend to before he vanished from Sophia's life entirely. Ethan powered up his laptop, his fingers moving quickly across the keys as he drafted an email. The recipient, Emma Bennett, Ryan's unsuspecting wife. The message was short, to the point, and entirely unemotional. "Mrs. Bennett, I believe this belongs to your husband. Sincerely, Ethan Grant." He attached a photo of the positive pregnancy test and hit send, without a moment's hesitation. Let the chips fall where they may. After one final sweep of the house to ensure nothing was left behind, Ethan slammed the front door shut, leaving behind the shattered remnants of his marriage. He barely glanced back as he climbed into his car, his jaw clenched, eyes locked straight ahead. The drive felt mechanical, his mind buzzing with rage and cold determination. But there was no turning back now. His life had been irrevocably changed, and he was done looking over his shoulder. Hours later, Sophia returned home, oblivious to the storm that had already swept through their lives. She was humming as she juggled grocery bags, a smile on her face, convinced this would be the day she'd share the news of her pregnancy with Ethan. She'd rehearsed it all in her head, confident he would be thrilled to hear about the baby on the way. Finally, she would be free of Ryan and the affair that had haunted her. She would get everything she wanted. "Ethan," she called cheerfully as she stepped inside, setting the bags on the counter. "I picked up steak for dinner. I thought we could celebrate," but the silence that hit her was unnerving, oppressive, like the air itself had thickened. Frowning, she set the bags down and pulled out her phone to call him, but something in her gut twisted. She moved through the house, each room colder than the last, until she reached their bedroom. Ethan's side of the closet was empty. The drawers were bare. The stark reality of what she was seeing sank in. "No." She whispered it at first, as though saying it aloud could somehow change everything. But her voice cracked with fear as panic surged through her chest. Frantically, she dialed Ethan's number, but the call went straight to voicemail. She texted him nothing. She tried emailing him, only for the messages to bounce back. Her heart hammered in her chest. What the hell had happened? How could he just vanish? What did he know? Her hands shook as she sank to the floor, her mind spiraling into a dark abyss. Desperation clawed at her, and in that frantic moment, she did the only thing she could think of. She called Ryan. Meanwhile, across town in a sleek, well-appointed office, Emma Bennett sat frozen, staring at her computer screen. An email from someone named Ethan Grant had just arrived in her inbox. The subject line alone sent a chill down her spine, and when she opened it, her world collapsed. There, attached to the message, was a photo of a positive pregnancy test, the implication glaringly clear. Her husband, Ryan, had fathered a child with another woman. Emma's hands trembled violently as she gripped her phone. She and Ryan had been trying for years to conceive, but their efforts had failed. And now, in a single brutal moment, a stranger had just told her that her husband had not only cheated on her, but had succeeded in doing the very thing they'd longed for, creating a child. Her teeth ground together as fury took hold, replacing the shock that had paralyzed her. She dialed Ryan's number, her breath coming fast as cold. Seething determination settled deep in her chest. She would find out the truth no matter what it cost. And if Ethan Grant's email was accurate, Ryan was about to feel the full force of her rage. Across town, in a modest, sparse apartment, Ethan sat on the edge of a rented bed, the dim light from his laptop casting eerie shadows on the walls. He wasn't just numb. He was methodical, coldly piecing together his evidence, emails, bank statements, text logs. Every detail he needed to expose Sophia's betrayal was right in front of him. This was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about control, about taking back what she had stolen from him, about making sure she paid for every lie. Ethan had spent hours meticulously piecing everything together, compiling a damning dossier. This wasn't just about understanding the betrayal anymore. It was about tearing down the fragile facade of their deceit, brick by brick. As he sat in his rented apartment, a notification flashed across his phone. An email from Emma Bennett. A grim smile tugged at the corners of his lips as he opened it. The pieces of his plan were falling into place. Soon, Sophia and Ryan would face the full consequences of their actions. As night settled over the city, the tension hung thick in the air. 3 lives teetered on the brink of collapse. Sophia was frantic, desperate to reach both Ethan and Ryan, scrambling to keep her web of lies from unraveling. Ryan was bracing for the confrontation that would reshape his future. And Ethan? He was the puppeteer, pulling the strings from the shadows, orchestrating their downfall. Sitting in his rented apartment, Ethan drummed his fingers on the armrest of his chair, the steady ticking of the clock on the wall marking time until Sophia would return home and realize his absence. He imagined her confusion, the panic that would rise as she slowly began to grasp the enormity of what had transpired. He almost felt a sick satisfaction, picturing her reaction as the full weight of the betrayal hit her. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma Bennett. "We need to talk in person." Ethan's lips curled into a cold smile as he typed out a quick response. suggesting a quiet cafe on the other side of town. Just as he hit send, another notification lit up his screen. Sophia was calling. A surge of anger coursed through him, but he declined the call without hesitation. He didn't need to hear her voice. Not yet. Across town, Sophia paced in the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Come on, Ethan," she muttered under her breath, the words bitter on her tongue as she tried dialing him again. She gritted her teeth when it went to voicemail. Frustrated, she tossed the phone onto the couch and looked around the house. Empty. The glaring absence of Ethan's presence was suffocating. Her chest tightened as she tried to piece together how everything had spiraled out of control so quickly. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she lunged for it, hope flaring briefly at the name on the screen. It wasn't Ethan. It was Ryan. "Ryan," she blurted, her voice trembling. "Thank God. I need your help. Ethan's gone. He took everything. I think he knows." There was a long pause on the other end, and when Ryan finally spoke, his voice was cold, hard. "Sophia," he said sharply, "stop. We can't keep doing this." Sophia froze, gripping the phone as her heart pounded in her chest. What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice quivering with disbelief. "The affair. The baby. All of it. It's over," Ryan replied, his tone cutting through the air like a knife. The silence between them felt suffocating, a weight neither of them could lift. Then Ryan's voice returned, laced with growing panic. "My wife knows. Somehow, she found out about the pregnancy test." "That's impossible," Sophia whispered, her world tilting beneath her. "I was so careful." "Clearly not careful enough," Ryan snapped, frustration dripping from every word. "Do you even realize what this?" He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, the words hanging in the air, full of unspoken terror. Ryan's voice cut through the line like ice, his tone final, unyielding. "The baby is not my problem, Sophia. I'm sorry, but I can't be involved in this. Don't call me again." The phone went dead. Sophia's hand fell limply to her side as she stared at the blank screen, disbelief surging through her like a tidal wave. The tears came fast, blurring her vision as the weight of his words sank in. In a matter of hours, everything she had so carefully built, her life, her plans, her future, had turned to rubble. Her chest heaved as the sobs came, each one feeling like a blow to her heart. Meanwhile, across town, in a dimly lit cafe, Ethan sat across from Emma Bennett. She was composed, elegant, and yet, there was a faint tremor in her hands, a quiet desperation in her eyes that betrayed the storm brewing inside her. She clutched her coffee cup as though it was the only thing holding her together. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Grant," Emma said, her voice calm, but tightly controlled. "Your email was unexpected, to say the least." Ethan nodded, his expression one of sympathy, but also measured. "Please call me Ethan. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances." Emma's eyes darkened, a flicker of pain and barely contained fury flashing across her face. "How long have you known about your wife and my husband?" she asked, her voice dropping to a hard edge. "Not long," Ethan admitted, his voice low and grim. "I just found out yesterday. The pregnancy test. It was like a knife to the gut." Emma's grip on her coffee cup tightened, her knuckles white. "Ryan and I have been trying for a baby for years," she said, her voice breaking slightly. She took a deep breath, composing herself. "But none of that matters now. What matters is what we're going to do about this." Ethan leaned in, his voice lowering to match hers in conspiratorial tone. "What do you have in mind?" A faint, icy smile curved Emma's lips. "I've been gathering evidence of Ryan's behavior for a while now. Financial discrepancies, suspicious transactions. I always hoped I'd never need to use it." Her eyes hardened as she looked at him. "But now you don't have a choice." Ethan's expression shifted as he met her gaze. "And from what you've told me about your husband, and what I know about mine, it seems we both have scores to settle." As their whispered conversation continued, laced with mutual determination, Ethan felt a grim sense of vindication. Sophia and Ryan had no idea what was about to hit them. Back at the house, Sophia sat amidst the chaos. Paper was strewn across the floor, her laptop open to a failed attempt at accessing their joint accounts. Each login attempt was met with frustration. The balances had been drained, the passwords changed, and the credit cards canceled. Ethan had erased her access with ruthless efficiency. The sudden chime of the doorbell startled her, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of hope rose in her chest. Could it be Ethan? Would he come back to fix everything? But as the moment passed, she knew the answer. Her life was unraveling, and there was no turning back. Maybe it was Ethan. Maybe he'd come back, ready to talk, ready to fix things. A spark of hope flared within Sophia as she rushed to the door, her heart pounding. She yanked it open, half expecting to see him standing there, ready to apologize, to make it right. But the words died in her throat as she came face to face with her mother, Chloe Parker. Chloe swept into the house, her sharp eyes scanning the chaos with a look of disgust. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "you've certainly made a spectacle of things." Sophia's stomach twisted, the weight of everything crashing down on her. "Mom, please," she whispered, closing the door behind her. "I don't need this right now." "Oh, I think you do," Chloe snapped, settling herself onto the couch with the air of someone who thought they still had control. "Sit down, Sophia. We need to talk about how you're going to fix this disaster." Reluctantly, Sophia dropped into the chair across from her, her body heavy with defeat. "There's nothing to fix," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan's gone. He knows about the affair, about the baby. He's left me with nothing." Chloe's gaze turned cold. "Nothing? Don't be so dramatic. You're carrying his child. That has to count for something." A bitter laugh tore from Sophia's chest, the sound raw and painful. "It's not his child, Mom. You know that." Chloe waved her hand dismissively, as though the truth didn't matter. "Details," she said coolly. "What matters is what you can prove. Right now, you're a pregnant woman whose husband has abandoned her. Use that." Sophia's eyes burned with disbelief. "You want me to lie? Trap Ethan with a baby that isn't even his?" "I'm suggesting you be practical," Chloe hissed, her voice sharp as a whip. "You've made your bed. Now figure out how to lie in it. Think about it. Ethan has everything: stability, a good job, resources. He's a far better father than that Jim you've been wrapped up with." Sophia's stomach churned with disgust, and nausea rose within her. It wasn't from the pregnancy. "I can't believe you're saying this," she spat, her voice trembling with fury. "Grow up, Sophia," Chloe shot back, her tone cutting through the room. "This is the real world. You need to think about your future and the future of that baby. Ethan may be angry now, but men get selfish when there's a child involved. They'll always come around." As Chloe continued weaving her cold, manipulative plan, Sophia felt a dark, suffocating desperation wrap around her chest. Was this really her only choice? To lie, scheme, and use her unborn child as a weapon? With no money, no support, and nowhere else to turn, she found herself nodding, surrendering to the ugly reality of it all. What else was there? Meanwhile, in his temporary apartment, Ethan sat with cold precision, his focus locked on the task at hand. After a productive afternoon strategizing with Emma, he was ready to execute the next phase of his plan. First, he composed a carefully worded email to HR, explaining his separation from Sophia due to her infidelity and demanding her immediate removal from his insurance and benefits. Next, he sent subtly worded messages to their closest mutual friends, dropping hints about Sophia's betrayal, careful not to completely tarnish his dignity. Finally, he set about documenting everything he could use to build a rock-solid divorce case. Her lies, her financial deceit, the affair, and the baby. All of it. A sense of grim satisfaction settled in his gut as he hit send on the final email. The net was tightening. They had no idea what was coming. His phone buzzed with a missed call from Sophia. His finger hovered over the block button, but he set it down instead. He'd face her soon, but not yet. On his terms, when he was ready. The next morning, the world felt like it was holding its breath. everything had changed. The day began with a false sense of cheerfulness, mocking the storm brewing in the lives of those caught in Ethan's web. Standing in front of the mirror, Ethan dressed with cold precision. His crisp suit symbolized control and power, a stark contrast to the chaos that was about to unfold. Today marked the beginning of Ethan's plan. The reckoning would start. He was about to systematically dismantle the life he'd built with Sophia. His first stop was Patricia Hendrick's office, a renowned divorce attorney with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Recommended by Emma, Patricia was exactly the ally Ethan needed. As he laid out the details of his case, Patricia's eyebrows lifted with each new piece of evidence. "Well, Mr. Grant," she said when he finished, her voice full of admiration for the thoroughness of his preparations, "I must say, you've done an impressive amount of groundwork. With the evidence you've compiled, we should have no trouble pushing for a swift and decisive divorce in your favor." A cold smile curved across Ethan's lips. "That's exactly what I want. How soon can we file?" Patricia's grin was sharp and predatory. "I can have the papers ready by 3 p.m. today. Does that work for you?" "Perfect," Ethan replied, the satisfaction clear in his voice. As he left the office, his phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "It's done. I've filed for divorce and reported Ryan's financial irregularities to the authorities. The storm is about to break." Ethan allowed himself a moment of pure, vindictive satisfaction. Everything was falling into place, and soon Sophia and Ryan would have no idea what hit them. Meanwhile, Sophia was waking up to the wreckage of her life. Her phone buzzed non-stop, filled with messages from friends, each one carrying shock, judgment, or thinly veiled pity. Ethan had been busy, tearing apart everything she had once counted on. The phone rang again, yanking her from her spiraling thoughts. It was the gym where she taught yoga. Dread settled in her stomach as she answered, already knowing what was coming. "Sophia, it's Mark," her boss said, his tone strained. "Listen, whatever you've heard, I'm sorry, but we can't have this kind of drama tied to our studio. It's bad for business. We're going to have to let you go." The words hit her like a physical blow. The call ended before she could speak. Staring at her phone in disbelief, Sophia felt her world crumble even further. In less than 24 hours, she had lost her husband, her lover, and now her job. Could it possibly get worse? A knock at the door answered that question. Her heart pounded as she opened it to find a courier holding a thick envelope. "Sophia Grant?" he asked. She nodded and he handed it over. "You've been served." Her hands shook violently as she tore open the envelope. Divorce papers. Ethan was suing her for infidelity and financial deception, and he had the proof. The sheer volume of evidence spilled out onto the floor around her as she collapsed to her knees, her chest tightening. This was it, the moment everything shattered. She had no one left. Nothing. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the crushing weight of her choices. Her sobs filled the room, raw and uncontrollable, as regret consumed her. The life she had so carefully built, her marriage, her career, her future, was now shattered, destroyed by her own hands. Across town, Ethan sat in the cold quiet of his temporary apartment, watching everything unfold exactly as he had planned. His revenge was falling into place, and Sophia had no idea what was about to hit her. Ethan sat in his temporary office, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the room as he worked through his projects. To his coworkers, he appeared calm and collected, the same competent Ethan they had always known. They couldn't see what churned beneath the surface, the storm gathering force with every passing minute. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "Ethan, please, we need to talk. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but please don't do this. I am pregnant. We can work this out." His fingers curled into fists, the words hitting him like a slap. "The child isn't mine. We both know that." His response was blunt, final. He hit send and immediately blocked her number. Enough was enough. The day moved on, but Ethan's focus never wavered. As the hours passed, reports began filtering in. Ryan Bennett had been arrested on suspicion of financial fraud, and his gym was under investigation, with clients fleeing in droves. Emma had acted fast, using her connections to expose Ryan's financial misdeeds. By nightfall, Ryan's reputation was in tatters, his entire life unraveling at the seams. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the dark satisfaction spreading through him. Phase 1 of his plan was complete. Sophia and Ryan's web of lies was disintegrating, piece by piece. But Ethan wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The sun dipped below the horizon as Ethan made his way back to the house he once shared with Sophia. The time had come for confrontation. He was going to face her one last time, to watch the weight of her actions settle over her like a crushing weight. As he pulled into the driveway, the warm glow of the lights inside felt mocking. What had once been a sanctuary now only fueled his cold resolve. He stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. Though he still had his key, he rang the doorbell. He wanted her to come to him. After a long moment, the door creaked open. Sophia stood there, pale, her face streaked with tears, her eyes rimmed red, her hair a tangled mess. She looked like a ghost of the woman she used to be. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of relief and fear. "You came back." "Not for long," he replied, his voice cold as ice. "We need to talk." He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. It all looked the same, yet everything felt different, tainted by the lies and betrayal. Sophia stood in the doorway, her hope clashing with the dread etched into her features. She opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Save it, Sophia. I'm not here for apologies or explanations," he said, his tone hard, unyielding. "I'm here to make things clear." Her shoulders slumped as she gestured weakly toward the living room. "Can we at least sit down?" He nodded stiffly but refused to sit, standing tall with his arms crossed, unwilling to let himself soften. Sophia perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands wringing in her lap. "I got the divorce papers," she said, her voice small, fragile. "Good," Ethan replied, his words cold and final. "Then you know where we stand." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "Ethan, please, we could work this out. I made a mistake. Terrible, but—" Ethan's gaze hardened, his voice cutting through her words like a knife. "No, Sophia. You made your choice. You destroyed everything, and I'm done. There's nothing left to fix." The weight of his words hit her like a freight train. She crumpled in on herself, the realization of her loss hitting her full force, and all she could do was cry, knowing it was too late to take anything back. "I love you. We can raise this baby together. We could still be a family," Sophia pleaded, her voice breaking with raw desperation. Ethan's laugh was harsh, cruel, and devoid of any humor. "A family built on lies? No, thanks," he snapped, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. His anger was palpable, every step he took as he paced the room radiating fury. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? That you could pass off another man's child as mine and I'd just go along with it?" Sophia flinched as his words hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice faltered. I made a mistake, Ethan. But we can get past this." Ethan stopped, his body rigid with rage, and turned to face her fully. His eyes were ablaze with an anger that made her freeze in place. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have slept with your fitness traitor." His voice thundered, the crude accusation like a slap to her face. Sophia gasped, the crudeness of his words shocking her to the core. "That's not fair. Ryan and it just happened." "No, Sophia," Ethan shouted, his voice rising with every word. "Things like that don't just happen. You made a choice, and now you're going to deal with the consequences." He took a step toward her, his presence suffocating, his gaze hard and relentless. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign the divorce papers, you're going to pack your things, and you're going to leave this house. You're going to stay out of my life, and you're going to stay out of my way." Sophia's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "Where will I go? I've lost everything. No job, no money." Ethan's face was stone. "That's not my problem," he said, his voice cold as ice. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." Her body stiffened with the weight of her failure, the enormity of the situation crashing over her. "Ethan, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I can't do this alone." For just a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in Ethan's eyes, perhaps the man who once loved her. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by something darker, harder. "You're not alone, Sophia," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "You have no one now. Remember?" His smile twisted into something cruel. "Oh, wait. I almost forgot," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "He dumped you the moment things got tough, didn't he?" Sophia's face crumpled under the weight of his words, her knees buckling as a wave of despair hit her. "How do you know about that?" she whispered, barely able to speak. Ethan's lips curled into an icy smile, devoid of warmth. "I know everything, Sophia. Every lie, every betrayal." He took a step closer, his voice cold and final. "And I'm done with it all." He turned toward the door, his hand gripping the knob. Without a glance back, he said, "You have 1 week to pack up and leave. After that, the locks will be changed." The door slammed shut behind him, and Sophia's anguished sobs filled the room, echoing through the empty house. Ethan didn't look back. The weeks that followed blurred together, legal battles, calculated decisions. Ethan submerged himself in his work, channeling every ounce of his anger, hurt, and frustration into his career. His colleagues marveled at his unwavering focus, completely unaware of the storm raging inside him. One bright, sunny afternoon, Ethan sat in his sleek new apartment, reviewing contracts. His phone buzzed, the caller ID lighting up with Emma. "Bennett? Ethan, are you free to talk?" Emma's voice trembled with tightly reined excitement. Ethan set aside his papers, feeling a shift in the air. "Emma, what's going on?" His words were steady, but inside, his pulse quickened. Her voice spilled out, shaking with barely contained triumph. "It's over. The divorce is finalized." He didn't get a single penny. Ethan allowed a small, savage smirk to cross his face. "Congratulations, Emma. How are you feeling?" She exhaled, the sound of relief mixed with something deeper. "Relieved, but lost. Honestly, I've spent so much time taking Ryan down. I don't even know what to do next." Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I get it," he said softly, "but this is your chance to start over, to rebuild your life." A brief pause followed before Emma spoke again, her voice laced with uncertainty. "What about you? How are things with Sophia?" Ethan's jaw clenched, his tone icy. "She's out of the house. The divorce will be finalized soon." "And the baby?" Emma asked, her voice quiet with caution. His words turned to steel. "Not my problem. Sophia made her choices, and now she has to live with them." The call ended, leaving Ethan to lean back in his chair. A grim sense of satisfaction settled over him. Ryan's life was in shambles. His reputation, his finances, all of it destroyed. Sophia, out of his life, forced to deal with the consequences of her lies alone. He had won. But despite the victory, there was a hollow emptiness gnawing at him. Why did it feel like something was missing? Shoving the feeling aside, Ethan buried himself deeper into his work. His focus was unrelenting. No distractions, no attachments. It was the only way to rebuild, the only way to stay untouchable. Months passed. Ethan climbed the corporate ranks, laser-focused on success. His personal life, non-existent. He had no room for anything that might weaken his resolve. No vulnerability, no distractions. Then, one crisp autumn morning, the fragile calm of his new life cracked. Walking into his favorite coffee shop, latte in hand, briefcase in the other, a voice stopped him dead in his tracks. "Ethan," he froze. The familiarity of her voice hit him like a blow to the chest. Sophia stood before him, a shadow of the woman he once loved. Her face was thinner, her skin pale, dark circles beneath her eyes. One hand rested protectively on her rounded belly. For a moment, the world around them seemed to blur, leaving only the two of them standing in a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Sophia broke the silence first. How are you?" Ethan's grip tightened around his coffee cup, his heart pounding in his chest. "Fine," he said, his voice cold and measured. "And you?" Her voice cracked, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm managing," she whispered. Ethan shook his head, cutting her off before she could say another word. "Whatever you're about to say, I don't want to hear it." He moved to step around her, but her next words stopped him dead in his tracks. "It's a girl," she said, her voice soft and almost reverent. "I'm naming her Lily. After your grandmother." The world seemed to tilt. The air in his lungs evaporated as memories flooded back. Of his grandmother, Lily. A woman he had loved deeply, who had meant everything to him. Lily. The name, the weight of it, slammed into him with a force he wasn't prepared for. His chest tightened, his emotions twisted into a knot. He stood frozen, unable to move, as the past and present collided in a single, overwhelming moment. Rocked by the weight of her words, Ethan's anger flared, his voice low and venomous. "You don't get to do that," he hissed, stepping closer, his body tense with fury. "You don't get to use my family, manipulate me like this." Sophia flinched, tears spilling freely from her eyes. "That's not what I'm doing," she sobbed. "I just thought you should know." "No." Ethan's voice rose, loud and sharp, drawing curious glances from passers-by. "No, you don't get to use my grandmother's name for a child that isn't mine. A child you conceived while destroying everything we built." Sophia's face crumpled, her sobs racking her body. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I'm so sorry." For a brief moment, memories of their happier days flashed through Ethan's mind. The laughter over breakfast, lazy Sundays, the warmth of her smile. But now, those memories were tainted, poisoned by her betrayal. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Your apologies mean nothing to me, Sophia," he said, his voice cold and final. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." Without another word, he turned and walked away, ignoring the sound of her weeping behind him. His latte had gone cold, but he didn't notice. His mind was a tangled mess of emotions, ones he thought he'd buried long ago. Back at his office, Ethan struggled to focus. The encounter had shaken him more than he was willing to admit. He considered calling it a day, but before he could, his phone rang. "Hey, Ethan, are you okay?" Emma's voice was concerned, yet tinged with caution. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I ran into Sophia today." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "How did that go?" "About as well as you'd expect," he replied dryly. "She's very pregnant." Emma's voice softened, a note of sympathy creeping in. "I'm sorry, Ethan." A silence fell between them, heavy and thick. Then Emma spoke again, her question lingering in the air. "How do you feel about that?" Ethan stared at the floor, the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "Part of me wants to hate her, to hate that child." He paused, his thoughts a jumbled mess. "But another part of me still cares." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning, as Emma gently interjected. "But another part of you still cares." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of his own admission sinking in. "Yeah," he whispered. "I guess." There was a long silence before Emma broke it again. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied, his curiosity piqued but wary. "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard, and he hesitated, searching for an answer that didn't feel hollow. "I don't know," he said honestly, his voice strained. "Are you?" Emma let out a soft, slightly melancholic laugh. "I'm getting there," she said, her voice quieter now. "It's not easy, but I'm figuring out how to live for me again. Not for Ryan. Not for revenge. Just for myself." Her words struck a chord deep within him. When was the last time he'd done something solely for himself? Something not driven by bitterness, not fueled by the need to prove a point? "Maybe," he said, his tone thoughtful, "maybe it's time I tried that too." As he hung up the phone, Ethan felt an unfamiliar shift inside him. The anger that had clung to him like armor for so long began to loosen its grip, leaving space for something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. An unsettling, but undeniable possibility. Something new stirred inside Ethan, not a desire to reconcile with Sophia. That bridge had been thoroughly burned, but a quiet hope for the future, one where her betrayal no longer defined him. He could feel the weight of it lifting, and it wasn't anger that remained, but a cautious sense of release. He knew that, in order to move forward, he had to leave her and everything she represented behind him. The next morning, Ethan woke with a renewed sense of purpose. He took extra care in dressing, choosing a tailored suit that made him feel powerful, composed. Today was the day he started reclaiming his life. He was done with the past. He was done with her. His first stop was his lawyer's office. Patricia Hendricks greeted him with her sharp, no-nonsense smile. "Mr. Grant, what brings you in today?" she asked, her tone efficient, ready for business. Ethan drew a steadying breath. "I want to finalize the divorce as quickly and cleanly as possible." Her eyebrows arched in surprise. "Are you certain? Given the circumstances, we could push for a settlement far more in your favor." Ethan shook his head firmly. "I'm sure. I don't want anything from Sophia. I just want this chapter closed." Patricia nodded, her professional mask snapping firmly into place. Within the hour, Ethan had signed the necessary papers. As he put the pen down, an unexpected lightness filled his chest. It was done. He was free. Walking out of the office, Ethan found himself wandering toward a familiar park, one where he and Sophia had spent countless happy afternoons together. Yet, instead of the pain he had expected, he felt only peace. The memories of that place no longer clung to him with bitterness. They simply were. Sitting on the old bench where they had shared so many moments, Ethan watched families playing and couples strolling by. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine a future not bound by the weight of resentment, but brimming with possibility. He felt a sense of release in his chest, as though something heavy had been lifted and, for once, he could breathe. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Emma lit up the screen. "Dinner tonight? I could use a friend." Ethan smiled as he typed a quick response. "Sounds great. See you at 7. He slipped his phone away, but a figure across the park caught his eye. It was Sophia. She walked slowly along the path, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. Her face was pale, etched with sadness and exhaustion. For a brief moment their eyes met. A flicker of the old pain surfaced in Ethan's chest, but it was muted now, dulled by something unexpected: pity. She had made her choices, and now she was living with them. The weight of her actions hung heavy on Sophia, just as his had once weighed on him. Ethan gave her a small nod, not one of forgiveness, but one of acknowledgement, before turning away. He stood up, his every movement purposeful as he walked away, leaving her behind. Each step felt lighter, his burden shrinking with every stride as he walked toward the future that had long been denied him. That evening, Ethan sat across from Emma at a cozy restaurant, the warm ambience doing little to mask the intensity of the moment. For the first time in a long while, he felt something like peace. They talked, laughed, and for a few hours the crushing weight of the past seemed to lift. The walls he had built around himself began to crack. "You know," Emma said, swirling her wine thoughtfully, her voice barely a whisper, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm almost grateful for Ryan and Sophia." Ethan's brow furrowed in disbelief. "Grateful?" She nodded, her expression sincere, unshakable. "If they hadn't betrayed us, we'd still be stuck in those miserable marriages. But now we have a chance at something real. Something better." The truth of her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. As much as it stung, he couldn't deny it. She's right. The pain, the wreckage, had led him here, to a place where he could finally rebuild. He looked at Emma, meeting her gaze head-on. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice steady. Her smile was warm, almost radiant as she clinked her glass against his. To new beginnings. The following morning, Ethan woke to a message notification on his phone. It was an email from Sophia. His heart skipped a beat before he opened it. "Ethan, I know you probably won't read this, and I don't blame you. But I needed to say one last time, I'm sorry for everything. I know I can't undo the pain I caused, but I hope someday you find happiness again. You deserve it, Sophia. The words were hollow, empty echoes of the past. He stared at the screen, the old anger rising in his chest like a storm. But this time it wasn't fury that gripped him. It was indifference. He took a deep breath, the weight of her words barely a whisper against the clarity in his mind. Without a second thought, he hit delete. He didn't need Sophia's apologies. He didn't need her hopes for his future. He had his own life to build. As he stood in front of the mirror, getting ready for work, he caught sight of himself. The man who stared back at him was unrecognizable. He was no longer the broken man torn apart by betrayal. He was stronger, sharper, hardened by the fire he had walked through. His shoulders straightened, and a grim smile tugged at his lips. He was ready for whatever came next. With purpose, he grabbed his keys and stepped into the sunlight. A new day awaited him, full of promise and potential. The shadows of the past would always lurk, but they no longer defined him. He had moved beyond them, beyond her, beyond everything that had once held him back. Ethan Grant was finally free. One step at a time, he was walking into the future, a future he would shape on his own terms.